Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of Ineptus Astartes. My name is Ned, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about the Legionis Auxilia rules, which are present in the Beta-Garmon book and give you access to a unique way to bring Solar Aux as allies for your already existing Space Marine forces. There's lots of options that open up, but definitely some drawbacks. Lots of things, though, to consider. I, for one, really enjoy this type of rules writing, as it gives a lot of creative opportunities for you, the player, to sort of come up with your own narrative and story. And also the compounding effect of some of these rules really allows for a unique force planning experience as well. So without further ado, I guess let's just jump into it. So the first thing for you to know is, well, we got to talk a little bit about the rules. So Legionis Auxilia, to access these rules, a couple things have to be met. One of them is that the main detachment must be led by a Legionis Astartes warlord. So anyway, a Space Marine that has access to the Legionis Astartes X special rule. Now that's specifically important because the rule specifically excludes any Legionis Hereticus, Shattered Legions, or Black Shields armies from pairing up in this way. Obviously, also, at this moment, there aren't any rules written for those anyhow, but there's a little bit of future-proofing in this big blurb that you'll see in the Beta-Garmon book, which says, they might show up later, but until then, this is how this works. In a effort, I don't want to complain too much about this. The page that this initial rule comes out on is like a full page to explain how this works. But other times we complain to GW for being too brief and not explaining it enough. So to specifically lay it out, the rule that you can access for Legionis Auxilia, it must match whatever your Warlord's Legionis Astartes X special rule is. So if you are a Blood Angels, if you have a Blood Angels Warlord, then your Legionis Auxilia must have the Blood Angels rule. Now this, I guess, is important to note because considering the fact that you can have as many allied detachments as you want, theoretically you could bring like an Imperial Fists force, a allied detachment of Blood Angels, and then also a Legionis Auxilia Blood Angels force. But this rule specifically says that if you're going to do something like that, that doesn't work, because it only works if the Blood Angels are the Warlord, and of course an allied detachment can't have the Warlord in it. For the purpose of this, Auxilia are always treated as fellow warriors, if not sworn warriors. So some, if you look at the allied matrix, some legions already have the sworn brothers sort of situation, which means it gives added benefits to scoring and whatnot. Also the ability for the main detachments, special characters, and independent characters and the others to go between squads, which has some really interesting connections. But otherwise, it's particularly interesting because there are a couple of Space Marine forces that have worse than the fellow warriors rating, so distrusted allies, and that would be the Space Wolves, strangely, the Night Lords, the Iron Hands, and the World Eaters. Rejoice if you play one of those legions and you wanted to have this rule, because now you get better access to scoring from these units. I guess if I think about it, it's the kid-friendly, like, saving the Auxilia reputation is sort of more 40k for the Solar or the Space Wolves, so I guess that does make sense. Anyway, it's not all roses and perfume, however, because there is one pretty sizable downside that is kind of buried in the big wall of text that is the Legionis Auxilia rule, which is that if you have a unit, one of your Solar Auxilia units that is benefiting from the special Legionis Auxilia rules, if they are within a Space Marine unit of the same Legionis Astartes tag rule, so if your Auxilia Blood Angels and a Blood Angel unit fails a leadership or morale test, actually, just morale test, and they are within 12 inches of a model of the Legionis Auxilia, then that unit with the model in it present is automatically pinned. This is pretty big. This means that, for one thing, the Marine abilities that can have a positive impact on the Marines passing leadership tests are going to be extra important in these situations, because those special abilities are going to come really clutch, because obviously if you can have one Marine unit fail a leadership test, and suddenly a lot of other stuff is also out of commission. A little bit later on, we're going to go back and take a look at just how big of an impact this is, because there are some situations where that drawback itself might be enough where you maybe don't want to consider taking these rules. So that'll be something that we'll have to consider as a whole at the end. Okay, so to continue on, though, we're going to talk about some of the different things that go into this as well, and basically just the stuff that you need to know about if you're thinking about adding some of these forces to your collection already. So if you're unfamiliar, there are a couple of interesting rules that the Solar Aux have, which are important to understand so that you can maximize their ability to interface with your Marines. The one thing that we definitely want to talk about to begin with is the Tercio special rule, which is a special rule that it really opens up a lot of possibilities for how you put units into the force organization chart. Basically, the Tercio special rule, when you buy a Tercio, you have an opportunity to fill it out with multiple units, and in those units, some of them are squatted together, but you can essentially have multiple squads at the same time. It allows you to do a lot with a smaller force organization chart, which is another reason why it is really, really awesome for this special rule, because your allied detachment, of course, has a lot fewer slots in it than others might. It allows you to get a lot more bang for your one heavy support slot in the allied detachment. Another thing that the Tercio special rule does is it encourages some interesting and tight grouping, because in some certain situations, your Tercio gets extra access to certain reactions as long as your units are close together. Basically, anytime a Tercio or a squad or unit that is part of a Tercio would have an opportunity to shoot in a reaction or move, then the entire Tercio can use that same reaction with the single reaction allotment, so long as all of the units that are going to use that reaction are within 3 inches of the unit that did it first. So if you've got a squad of 20 riflemen and they're right next to the other 20 riflemen squads that are part of that same infantry Tercio, then as long as they're in coherency with each other, then you can fire a return fire, interceptor, or like an overwatch with all of them. So you can see how this is pretty powerful and really makes shooting at some of the units in your Solar Aux army really kind of scary. Potentially this is really, really rough though, however, for our pinning problem, because the infantry models are on 25s, and that means that there are a lot of models that can fit into a very close and enclosed space, and that means that pinning them is going to be really easy. Now, we'll get back to that in a minute, though. No, Tercio has some other, little things that are important to note as well. For example, if any unit from a Tercio is placed into reserve, then everything must be placed into reserve. And if one thing is placed with deep strike or whatever, then they all must be the same. They all must be deployed within 3 inches. The units must be deployed within 3 inches of each other at the start of the game. However, they can move away, but you're probably not going to want to in a lot of situations. The units that you can bring and the options that are available to them are, of course, they vary by unit to unit. Each Tercio is different. Here are a couple of different examples. The Armored Tercio allows you an armored command section, and then 1 to 3 of 2 different Lehman Russ tanks. And the same thing with the Infantry Tercio, 0 to 1 and 1 to 3. But there are ways, of course, that this can get mixed up as well. So, for example, you can take the Ultramar pattern cohort, and now you get way more rifle sections put into one Tercio. And we'll get to cohorts a little bit later, but essentially cohorts they basically function like a rite of war. They allow the rules to bend a little bit, they add some bonuses, and then also add some detractions as well. Some of them are really fun, some of them would be really cool to run if you liked it. The cohorts all have different flavors, and some of them are stronger than others, of course, like anything else, but a lot of them are really, really fun and flavorful, and they can definitely fit in different ways with some of the Legionis Auxilia rules that we're going to be talking about in a bit. Now, because of this, clever Tercio rules can create some really wild combinations. For example, one heavy support Tercio, armored Tercio, can have technically 10 Lehman Russes in it, it's a lot of tank for one support slot. You can also have 9 different rapiers as one heavy support squad. And that's actually one of the cheaper ones you can do. You can max out a Solar Auxilia rapier battery. You can max out an artillery Tercio. and have nine different Gravis multi-lasers, each shooting 6 shots. It's a lot of shots downfield, and because every rapier is only 35 points, it's a ridiculously cheap option. There's lots of different fun things you can do in regard to this. Now, there's one other rule that we need to talk about, and that's the close order rule, and this affects mostly infantry, entirely infantry, actually, and it has to do with deployment and movement and some other things like that. So, close order is a type, and if you take a look and you were looking and saw that all of your infantry have heavy weapons, you might think to yourself, oh man, that's really not that great. It's going to be really hard to reposition these guys. Well, close order allows you to shuffle up half of your movement, 3 inches, and then you still get to fire your heavy weapons, which is pretty awesome and very important, because otherwise the offensive output for that unit would be a problem. So this is great because it allows some small force adjustment while continuing your damage output. The close order rule is interesting because it says you cannot run. However, the riflemen are wearing the void armor, so they can't do so anyway because they're already heavy. So it's not really hurting you much here at all. There's also a penalty on the way you move in reactions if you choose to do that instead of shoot, but realistically most of the time you're going to stand there and shoot. So again, because you're trying to take advantage of that tertio rule, you have to be in deployment close. You can still move a little bit, but riflemen really don't have the ability to like scoot out of the way and create a lot of space for them. We're going to talk about how that might be a problem in a little bit. Right now, we're going to scoot on and we're going to get started with the Loyalist Legiones Auxilia rules. And so we'll start with the First Legion, the Dark Angels. So their special rule is Unity of Mind. Once per phase, when a reaction is declared for a unit entirely composed of models with the Legiones Auxilia, Dark Angels, and Tertio special rule that allows them to make a shooting attack, a single unit composed of Legiones Astartes Dark Angels that has at least one model within 6 inches of the reacting unit may also move or make a shooting attack as described in the reaction being made, as though it were part of the same tertio as the reacting unit and it was in formation. This doesn't cost you an additional reaction. However, the Dark Angels unit is considered to have acted, so you can't double dip, which is good. But yeah, it does allow you to throw one additional bit of shooting in with everything else that's going on in the tertio. Now, this is pretty excellent in some ways and complicated in some other ways. It's an excellent additional reaction bit of synergy. This is also really interesting because then you can start to think about, well, which units would I want to try to benefit from this? Obviously, if you've just got like tactical marines that are nearby, having them shoot a volley of bolters in a given situation isn't necessarily bad. You can always score a couple of extra wounds, but then you can really start to think about tailoring it towards the experience of what you're likely to see. Now, you can actually get really creative here, and you've got a lot of freedom when you think about how it is you want to make this function, but consider it like this. When you, for example, are picking weapons to go into a specific squad, oftentimes you pick weapons that have a bit of synergy so that when the whole squad has to shoot at just one target, all of the shots in the unit are in the right spot, right? So you're not going to necessarily put one last cannon in with a bunch of bolters, hilariously, because that's the way it always used to be. Because, if you want that last cannon to shoot, at 36 inches or to 48 inches or whatever, the bolters are going to be absolutely useless, and so they will have no impact in the game. So, likewise here, when we're talking about this, what kind of gun all of your riflemen are going to have, the las rifle, and very likely what you're going to be shooting at and that sort of thing, what they are likely to be able to damage. And so then you can decide if you want to try to tailor your choice for something that is going to help with something that's going to hurt them. So for example, I don't know, if this is a unit that you suspect is going to try to charge you in the assault phase and you're returning fire, then maybe you want something that has a chance to pin that unit in your opponent's turn so that you don't get a chance to have them charge later. Maybe that your opponents or your friends are going to be running some heavier infantry squads, like with 2+ saves and some mild invulnerable saves, then throwing together like a plasma gun squad, or some interrupters, or just a special weapons team or something that has a very low AP that can really make your friend second guess whether or not they want to shoot into simply a lowly squad of riflemen, or just make them really pay for it when they charge you later on. So like I said, there's a lot of creative options here, and I really, really like this one a lot. I think it feels very Dark Angels because of the fluidity of it and how much you can do. So like I said here, think about recon squads, think about interrupters. The biggest thing, though, is that the range considerations, meaning that you have to be within 6 inches, puts you at a high risk of getting your Auxilia pinned. And so one of the things that I might consider is that if you are going to go this route and include your Legionis Auxilia, maybe you look at taking the Marshal of the Crown Warlord trait, which gives a +1 to all Dark Angels units that have at least one member of the same hexagrammaton marking as the Warlord. That +1 to leadership might really help you keep your units from getting pinned. So I guess this is a good point to talk about and really explain why I'm so concerned about this pinning situation, especially as it relates to the Auxilia, and how it really is going to impact several of these rules, especially the ones that require the Marines and the Auxilia to be in close connections with one another. So first of all, when you're thinking about how rules are going to affect your game, think about rules in circles, or maybe more accurately, auras. I think that's what other people, smarter people, call them. But basically, your Solar Auxilia are going to potentially be automatically pinned if anything fails a leadership test and within 12 inches of you. So if we think about a single guardsman on the field, a single rifleman on the field, and then a 12-inch bubble around them, a 12-inch radial bubble around them, that means that there is a huge section of the board in which that guardsman can be negatively impacted if a certain thing happens, with what is probably likely to be very likely, because you're going to have probably a congested board if you're intending to intermix these units. Specifically, this is a problem then, of course, for the Dark Angels, because you are looking at needing to be within 6 inches in order to trigger the whole point of using this sort of rule. And so you are going to definitely be within range with a lot of your squads that you're going to want to use. Also the squads that are going to be vulnerable to being pinned and then being useless because you're wanting to make the cool thing go off. Now, in particular, though, let's point out the complication then with how tercios work. Tercios, if you want to get the full benefit of their special rule that they can all react as one, then every squad in that tercio needs to be within 3 inches of each other, have one model within 3 inches of another one squad of that same tercio. So you can really see how all of a sudden one 5-man squad of Dark Angels connected to a rifleman tercio has the potential to put at least probably 3 squads out of the game entirely, depending on how you position it, and maybe more if you're not going with just the minimum amount of tercios. Now, without trying to be too dramatic, failing a single leadership test, causing one squad to withdraw, can be a big impact on a game. But if when you do so, you also cause 3 to 6 units of Solar Auxilia to be automatically pinned for an entire turn, that is a game-losing dice roll. That doesn't sound like a lot of fun to me. I don't think I would have a lot of fun playing against it, because if that happened, basically I would have a full turn to do whatever I wanted to my opponent. It doesn't sound very spirit of the game, but it is the rules as GW wrote them. I guess before I move on, I just point out that I do like this rule. I like the concept of it, but it's going to be a huge risk and something you're going to have to pay attention to as you put it together. I will start putting them in which of them I think is most likely to be fun and successful, put them into a little chart for you. And pretty much all of the ones that require you to be in close proximity of, especially the infantry units, are definitely going to get a hard look from me, because they will cause just as many problems as they solve. Next up is the White Scars, and the White Scars have a really interesting rule, and it's no secret here that I'm a White Scars fanboy. I have always loved since I read Scars by Chris Raitt, I have loved the White Scars, and they are a reason that they were my first really big Horus Heresy army, and I still love them very much. Since the edition changed, there were some things that I really didn't like that changed about bikes in particular, but White Scars rules were just so good that it really overcame it. I think the White Scars are some of the strongest. They have some of the strongest rules in the game as far as just options and ways you can play them. A lot of variety, really cool stuff. And so it's interesting for me to see here that here is another one that really, in my opinion, does not miss. Eye of the Storm for the Legionis Auxilia. When a unit containing one or more models with the Legionis Auxilia White Scars and Tercio rule, as well as line, that's important, is either in the deployment zone, the controlling player's deployment zone, or has at least half of its models within 6 inches of an objective, then all the models in this unit gain the Feel No Pain 6+ special rule. If any model of the unit has a different variety of that rule, then instead you just get a +1. This can only stack up to a +5. So I'm trying to think of... Off the top of my head, I can't think of any ways that you could have gotten it higher for the Solar Aux, but it's interesting. So anyway, a 6+ Feel No Pain if half of your models are within 6 inches of an objective, or if you're in your deployment zone. Okay, why is this so cool? So first of all, especially if you're doing an allied detachment, you're not going to have like a ton of these squads. It's pretty easy to attach a medic to the squad to give it a 6+ Feel No Pain already, and then this can bump it up to a 5-up. Now, a 5-up Feel No Pain on a model with a 4-up save means that you could actually kind of get a little bit tanky on the objectives. And that's exactly where you would kind of want these guys anyway, because especially if you were going to outfit these or put them alongside, for example, the Chagorian Brotherhood. The Chagorian Brotherhood might want to zip around the battlefield and really take advantage of its movement to be able to go a lot of different places. But a core, anvil of Solar Aux infantry surrounded by some support units on objectives in the mid-board, especially if you could plant the objectives closer to your side in certain places. It could be a kind of a tough unit section to remove, and definitely against what you think of as the standard way to look at the White Scars. This is a really, really cool rule. It adds something different that White Scars don't necessarily have as much of. Yes, they have a rate of war that gives all of their infantry a 5+ Feel No Pain, but there's all sorts of stipulations that come along with it, and you can negate all of those and get another cheaper infantry option, which can do the same thing and stand on objectives for you in a really cool way. Okay, the White Scars get lots of cool rules. The Space Wolves also get some rules. I'm not going to say that I don't think the Space Wolves have good rules. I think their Legion trait is pretty great, is really great. But some of the stuff that they get it's a little bit silly, and this is fine. No model may take a cover save or shrouded damage mitigation roll against wounds inflicted by shooting attacks, which are made by models with the Legionis Auxilia Space Wolf special rule as part of a reaction. So there it is at the end, okay? At first it was like, oh, no cover saves, no shrouded mitigation, awesome. Oh wait, this only applies in reactions. That's very sad. Would making no cover saves for anything in there, in the entire allied detachment be maybe a little bit strong? Yeah, it might have been. But then why is this the direction that we chose to go with it? We'll see more of it later on here. There are really powerful and impactful special rules in here, and this one is just very specific. And so there are a couple situations where it will come in handy, but otherwise not necessarily. Now admittedly, this does apply towards every unit, not just riflemen, but some of the biggest, craziest things that you would want to shoot with, for example, artillery or Layman Russes, they can't fire with their main weapons because their strengths are too high and they're not defensive, so you can't react with them. So it's kind of a whole sad thing, in my opinion. Now, one thing that the Space Wolves do have going for them here, though, is that, similar to the White Scars, you don't actually have to be near Legionis Astartes models to get access to this. So that definitely does give you the benefit of not needing to be near in a place where you can be pinned easily in order to use your power. So, especially if you were going to design a force in which the Solar Auxilia part was going to be sequestered off to the side or doing something different from what your main army was doing, then, there are definitely situations where avoiding those cover saves would be handy, would be useful. Overall, impact, whatever, no, not necessarily. Also, why do the Auxilia who just pal around with, are they all from Fenris? No, that's not what the flavor text says. Whatever. It's okay. But wait, here it is. Here's the moment to shine, Space Wolves Solar Auxilia players. If your opponents are the Imperial Fists, you have definitely got your moment to shine. Because the Imperial Fists Legionis Auxilia has the Steadfast rule, which is a unit entirely composed of models with this rule, with the Legionis Auxilia Imperial Fists rule, and line, increase all cover saves granted to them by terrain by 1. This increases existing cover saves and does not grant one when in terrain that does not normally grant it, and it cannot be better than a 4+ armor save. Still, though, riflemen standing in 5+ cover are now standing in 4+ cover, which is really, really awesome, especially, again, if you are being crafty when planting your objective markers and you place them in a way that you would want to get your Auxilia into terrain to hold that position, then they can be kind of beefy. It's, standing and hiding. It's the Imperial Fist way. It's really good. For those of you who are new, yes, this is kind of an Imperial Fists hate channel. Sorry, I need new material. Still good rule, though. Here we go. Finally, some Imperials with a bit of class. It's the Blood Angels. And their, hilariously lore-appropriate Glory of Humanity rule, is pretty good. Pretty good in its own way. Any Legionis Auxilia Blood Angel model that is locked in combat increases its attack by 1 so long as it is within 6 inches of a friendly model with the Legionis Astartes Blood Angel special rule. Okay, so a couple things is that it's not if a model within a unit, so it's model by model. So if you've got a large squad of, whatever in combat, and there is one Blood Angel that is still nearby in the combat, you are still measuring inches from that one lone model, which is less good, but I think kind of follows the trend of how a lot of these close combat rules typically work. Regardless, though, one initial attack is oftentimes going to be pretty impressive, especially when you consider that many of the models that you can, in fact, bring along from the Solar Auxilia list are 1 attack models, so doubling their effectiveness is pretty great. One thing that is, of course, sad about this, but less of a problem, since we are talking about units that are within 6 inches of each other, this, of course, is going to put us into the problem area for that automatic pinning rule that the Legionis Auxilia units have to take. However, this can be mitigated in a couple different ways. Obviously, if this happens when you're on your way to a close combat, that is, of course, still going to be a problem. However, units that are already in close combat cannot be pinned. And also, if a unit is pinned and then it eventually ends up getting charged, then it just fights like normal. The one benefit or drawback here is that if you're a unit who is pinned but you're in cover and your opponent is somehow like missing frag grenades or whatever, they don't take in a penalty to initiative to charge you because you're not fast enough to take advantage of it. It's a small situation, not likely to occur too many times. And again, the nice thing about this is that, let's say you get a joint assault off with some Space Marines and some Legionis Auxilia, and the Marines fail. The Auxilia, well, they probably are going to fail anyway, because if the Marines are falling back, the Auxilia statistically is less likely to be staying. But you're not going to be pinned there, because you can't be. So that's one thing that's kind of nice. One thing to note here is, as I start looking at this, like I said, some of these are really fluffy and cool. I actually do like this concept, especially for the image of, like Blood Angels on the wall, Siege of Terra fighting neck and neck, side by side with human Auxilia, and watching them be inspired by the Angels of Red, the Angels of Baal, which is totally a thing that happens so many times in the books. That being said, from a diversity standpoint, to get the best benefit out of this, you're probably looking at a Solar Auxilia build that is more melee focused. And you know who can already do the melee better than any of the Solar Auxilia melee? The Marines can. So it's not necessarily like we're getting something new as far as rules variety, but we are getting a cool flavor and narrative thing here. There's a couple different places in this book where the rules writers really clearly are favoring like a fluff or an idea of how an army is supposed to work, as opposed to what the army could actually really need. And so it's sort of interesting how those two things sort of work together sometimes, as far as the narrative and the fluff, whatever, and then the crunch gets left behind, or vice versa. But it's interesting. Next up, we have the Iron Hands, and I do play me some Iron Hands, and I do enjoy them, and this rule is okay. Cerebral Augment says that when a unit composed of models with the Legionis Auxilia Iron Hands special rule fails a morale check because of casualties in the shooting phase, it doesn't fall back. Instead, it suffers D3 automatic wounds with no save of any kind allowed. Damage mitigation is acceptable. I particularly like the flavor of this because the Cerebral Augment here, the idea that there is like a bomb planted in these guys or something, and they would run away, but instead just some of them die, and then the rest of them decide to stay put, you know? How best to live a life without fear? The best way to combat fear, obviously, just to end up dead. There you go, no problems anymore. That's a joke, by the way. It's not a very good one, but it's a joke. So this is a fairly decent rule, as far as like if you want to just be building squads that want to stay in one place. I don't think it's that necessary for most of the time, in my experience from playing Solar Auxilia anyway, especially when you're running smaller squads. By the time they start getting shot at, usually so few of them are left that you might end up killing them with his D3 automatic wounds anyway. So I'm not really sure if it's 100% worth it. It is pretty funny though. Also, I think fitting because Iron Hands are one of the legions that has sort of the less than happy relationship with Solar Auxilia. Here's a good example in the lore of maybe why. You know, did you hear about Jimmy's regiment? How'd they do? Well, they went with the Iron Hands and they got bombs strapped to their chests. Anyway, all right, Ultramarines, here we go. They, of course, have a very expected special rule. All Solar Auxilia with the Legionis Auxilia special rule Ultramarines become forklift certified. No, that's a joke. No, that would be cool too, though. Instead, though, the way it works is when a unit containing one or more models with the Legionis Astartes Ultramarine special rule declares a charge against an enemy which has had one or more models removed as a casualty as a result of shooting attack made by a model with the Legionis Auxilia Ultramarines rule in the same turn, any shooting attack made against the charging unit as part of a reaction must be resolved as a snapshot. Okay, so that's really complicated, but basically what this says is that if Marines charge into something that has had at least one model removed from some of the Auxilia somewhere, then the Overwatch reaction has to be resolved as a snapshot, which means hitting far less often than it would be otherwise. This is really awesome, actually. Almost as cool as being forklift certified. This has a bunch of things going for it. One, there's an obvious symmetry here between the different of detachments that you're going to be using. It's very clear to see how they're all going together. That already fits with the Ultramarine concept of pouring on fire from multiple locations, using multiple units to back each other up, etc. Now, while the Ultramarines rule requires everybody to be close up together for the Legionis Astartes Ultramarines, but here there isn't necessarily a range specified. So, you know, you can be firing at long range with your las guns and just dump a bunch of shots into a tactical squad or a command squad or something and just hope for enough wounds to cause one single wound. And in that case, if you do so, you're now giving your own side a considerable benefit as far as survival, depending on what's going on in certain situations. Now, again, you know, if you're charging something that doesn't have a lot of really devastating shooting, this is going to have much less of an impact. But think about, you know, charging a heavy support squad of las cannons, knowing that you can only get hit on sixes. That's really powerful. I like this one a lot. Another thing that I like about this, one, is that it's not specified what sort of Auxilia unit has to trigger this. So, you know, if you've got nothing else to shoot at with your Vanquisher Layman Russes and you're just throwing brutal 2 shots into a bunch of Terminators, or, you know, like I said, you know, a heavy weapons team or whatever, you're hitting hard with high strength weapons that have a low AP and are going to be pushing through major damage, or, you know, just like I said, just like tons of random little rifleman squads that are all over the place. There's lots of opportunities here. I would expect nothing less from the Ultramarines, though. Pretty great stuff. Another rule that feels like it was written by fans just because of the theme of it, but really does make sense and has a big impact on the game, Promethean Wards. Basically, this turns all of your regular Salamanders, Marines, into 4+ cover for whatever is behind them, provided whatever is behind them is a Solar Auxilia Salamanders. This is really, really good. It does not specify what kind of models can receive this cover save, and so all sorts of things can draw. That if you can draw a line of sight through the unit, then you can take a 4+ save. This includes tanks, artillery, lots and lots and lots of stuff. This is really fantastic because, especially if, and thinking about synergy concepts as well, you have all of your Marines, and you're going to want them to be mid-range to close range in a lot of situations, so you can try to get in there and mix it up. The Solar Auxilia are going to happily be deployed behind those Marines, pouring on fire, adding sort of utility as they can in a lot of different ways, but also being very effectively protected simply because of the battle line that you could put together where you intervene, a whole bunch of Marines in between the Aux and your opponent. Think about like a bulging horseshoe sort of deployment where you're pushing out towards the middle, or simply a line, honestly. It's very easy to set up, provided you're paying attention to the line of sight corridors and whatever that are on your table. Very fluffy and effective. It would be funny if you had to remove some of the salamanders instead as they got shot, but that's not in here, so there is no penalty for the salamanders using themselves as cover in this way. Really, really good rule, and really fun, and has some really cool synergy ideas, especially when we start looking at some of the some of the different cohort concepts that we have to choose from. Okay, last but not definitively least is the Raven Guard and their Spearhead of Liberation rule, which, sidebar, it's important to note that the Raven Guard, again, also have a regular rite of war that encourages the use of Solar Auxilia as allies, so that's already something that a Raven Guard player might have been considering. So here's an additional rule for you to ponder. A unit composed entirely of models with the Auxilia Raven Guard special rule that contains a single model which can see a friendly model within 24 inches, which has the Legionis Astartes special rule, and is drawn from the same army's primary detachment. Everybody gets a +1 leadership to a maximum of 10. So this is pretty good. +1 leadership is pretty nice. The fact that you just have to draw a line of sight, the fact that the bubble is 24 inches, it means that you can, especially if you are being careful about what units you bring and how you deploy them, you can basically effectively remove the chance of your Legionis Auxilia from being pinned in a lot of different ways. A +1 to their leadership means they're not likely, less likely, I guess, to run off the board as well. So if you have snipers set up, or you just have people sitting on back table objectives just away from the main point of the battle, they're likely to stick around and, do their basic thing. My one basic concern with this special rule, though, is it's important to point out that the +1 leadership, if you are within 12 inches of the Raven Guard model that you're trying to draw that leadership from, it won't save your auxiliary units from being pinned if the Raven Guard themselves are pinned, because the thing is automatically without save. But still, it's a nice rule, especially if you are deploying and thinking about playing in a specific way in which the forces are more or less a little bit split. So wise viewers with excellent observational skills might note that there's a lot more of this video left, and I just finished with all of the loyalists like I said I was going to. Well, as we do oftentimes in Ineptus Astartes, we plan in a very light way to start, and then actualize ourselves fully as we go along. And I basically realized as I was recording this that the next video I make is going to be way too long as I actually go through and think about the actual specifications. So we're going to do the full first glance at all of the legions now, and we'll finish up with the Traitor 9. So here we go. So the Emperor's Children get the Art of Suffering, and what this does is when this Auxilia unit it takes a casualty. So causes something to be removed from the unit. The rest of the models in that unit gain Hammer of Wrath until the end of their controlling player's next turn. This is actually a pretty nice rule, even though it doesn't necessarily look that great. First of all, I'd like to point out that Hammer of Wrath does something kind of interesting when we're talking about the assault phase. Hammer of Wrath negates hits. And so hitting oftentimes is, if you watch this channel at all, you've seen me talk about the fact that hitting and the defensive bonuses of having a high weapon skill versus, the problems of having a low weapon skill is probably one of the more important damage steps to take, because it's at the start and it lets everything else go from there. So having automatic Hammer of Wrath hits on little Solar Auxilia models, even though they're little Solar Auxilia models, they've got little bases. You can crowd a whole bunch of them on whatever it is you're charging. And again, their little attacks, whatever they have, having every base have an automatic hit does dramatically increase the kind of offensive capability you can have for these. Now, there's a lot of other things to love about this one as well. First of all, the rule does not specify that the Emperor's Children need to be anywhere near for it to trigger. So there's less likelihood of you needing or accidentally putting yourself in a situation where you can get them pinned. I mean, you can work around that if you want to. The other thing, too, is that it's any shooting attack, so if you take casualties in Overwatch and it hasn't been triggered yet, this will go off. It's a nice little bonus. It's not like a ton of damage by any stretch of the imagination, but if you are going to go into a melee-focused Solar Aux, then this is not bad as far as those options go. Upon reflection, there are just so many melee-focused Solar Aux builds, which is really wild considering the war gear options don't really back it up much at all. It's really kind of interesting. It's much more of a militia thing than a Solar Aux thing, but I digress. Next up, we have the Iron Warriors, and this is true to form. Dorn's boys got a really powerful rule, and the Iron Warriors get one that's kind of meh. Perturabo's shaking his head. When a unit entirely composed of models with this rule for the Iron Warriors Auxilia, when you take a leadership test for pinning or concussive, you ignore negative modifiers. So, obviously, pinning and concussive are big deals. Concussive, less so, because that's the one that lowers weapon skill. You're already going to have, generally speaking, crap weapon skill when compared to Marines, definitely. So losing one more is bad, but it's you probably weren't thinking you were going to do great with that. Anyhow, the pinning, though, of course, is good. If there's penalties associated with the pinning check and you don't have to take them, being pinned is very, very bad. Unfortunately, you can still just be pinned by the standard way with this Legionis Auxilia, which is just if a Marine around you fails a leadership test. So again, I don't rate this very much. It's very specific. It doesn't protect them in a lot of different ways. It still has the major flaw that the Legionis Auxilia have built in as part of their core. Now, if this at the end had a sentence and that, instead of auto being pinned, they can test to be pinned if they see a Legionis Astartes model fail a morale check, that would be awesome. That would be really, really excellent, because that would be much more. It would allow much more of a chance to prevent things from entirely going wrong. And, again, I just think it kind of feels bad to have a rule around pinning to try to protect you from something bad happening in pinning when there's a built-in backdoor sneak attack to ruin your unit anyway through that same rule. So, next one up is the Night Lords. And I like this one a lot. It's another close combat rule, but it's properly flavored. So the Legionis Auxilia are never affected by fear, which is fun. All models in the unit entirely composed of models with both Legionis Auxilia and Night Lords, and the Tercio special rule gain Rage 2 for the duration of any combat assault phase in which a single model from the unit begins that assault phase within 12 inches of any friendly model with the Fear X special rule that is not part of that same detachment. So clearly this is designed to help you get this bonus from being near Night Lords, but it doesn't have to be Night Lords. If you're doing a multiple detachment sort of thing and you're getting fear from something else, it will still trigger. I like Rage as a mechanic for this because, especially like this combat stim sort of situation, this frenzy thing, the kind of lunatics that would take to run with the Night Lords for any length of time. Rage is a good way to represent that. You're getting 2 extra attacks on the charge. The biggest thing, of course, is that it's kind of easy to shut down in some situations, obviously by charging them first or simply by using a hold the line reaction, but it's still pretty great. The other thing that's cool is that, let's say they do get pinned or whatever. If you're a proper Night Lords character, you don't really care if these guys live or die anyhow. So, just stay in character and let the weakness of the Legionis Auxilia, of them getting pinned or whatever else, just, let it happen. Statistically, I think, though, it's important to note that, interestingly, I believe in most situations, Hammer of Wrath that we get from the Emperor's Children version is better than this one. Not that it matters exactly, because it's going to depend on which Marines you have to put on the board, but just wanted to bring that out. The biggest thing, of course, is that Hammer of Wrath requires you to get into base to base, and if you're running with bigger blobs, then Rage clearly is going to be superior, because you can get a lot of guys in to fight in the back ranks, that sort of thing. But a fun one, narratively fluffy, I think, and I like it. Okay, the World Leaders, Butchers do. It's funny, the World Leaders also, I think, just have a lot of really efficient rules, and this is a good example of that as well. Butchers do when making shooting attacks, targeting units which are falling back or who have previously had 1 or more models removed as casualties. Models with the Legionis Auxilia World Leader special rule add +1 to hit. Basically, if you have a specific target that you want to take out, on the first shooting turn of the game, just make sure that something Marine shoots at that thing and takes off 1 model, and then your whole army, your whole Legionis Auxilia detachment can just pour it on there. Now this, it doesn't say like this turn or this phase or anything like that, so theoretically as soon as you've lost 1 model, then the bonus is good for anything for the rest of the game. So what's interesting to this is that, I think a generic +1 to hit for the army obviously would be just way too strong, but this is a power that is only going to get better as the game goes on. You're going to be losing models, so you'll have less units who can take advantage of it, but at the same time your opponent will also similarly be, shedding models in different places. And so, by turn 4, anymore on a lot of the turn 4 games that I end up playing, it seems like every squad almost usually has 1 casualty. So suddenly this becomes really powerful at the end when you're trying to push towards the end. The other thing, of course, that's really important to me to note is that this is a synergy concept, because the World Leaders are obviously going to be much better at your melee element. So, here's a rule set that just makes the shooting better so it can be complementary as opposed to conflicting. So, really good rule here. The Death Guard get Mantle of Death, and it's a huge whole paragraph here. When rolling to wound against a model with this rule, for any attack inflicted by Fleshbane or Poison, reduce the result of that roll to wound by 1. Additionally, they get to reroll failed dangerous terrain tests. What's funny about the way that a lot of these rules are written, in my opinion, is that a lot of times you will have a large paragraph, okay? This is my teacher's. Bear with me here. So you get a paragraph, you pick a topic, you're talking through with this rule, we're talking about the focusing on the Fleshbane and the Poison thing, which is extremely just not that common. One of the things that I've always not loved about the Death Guard is how much they focus on being protected against poison and Fleshbane and that sort of thing, when they are one of the main forces that actually bring that. So they don't actually get to see much of a benefit from this. And I think similarly, the Solar Auxilia that you use won't get a lot of this. There's not a lot of poisoned out there. There's not a lot of Fleshbane. So most of the time, this won't do much for you. Now, the last sentence, the kind of oh, and by the way, here's another thing. That's like the best part of this rule, being able to reroll failed dangerous terrain tests. Now, dangerous terrain is similarly not as common, but again, Death Guard can create dangerous terrain. And so if you are playing into that style, but you still want to use this allied detachment, this rule helps them survive the situation that you're creating on the board, but also other, regular hazards that are going to come up. It's a pretty nice rule. It's not earth-shattering, it's not overpowering, but it's nice and effective for the kind of vibe that the Death Guard are trying to put out. Thousand Suns actually is one that I like quite a lot. Any model with the Legionis Astartes Thousand Suns special rule, which suffers a perils of warp while within 12 inches of a unit entirely composed of this Auxilia special rule and infantry, that's important I guess, can choose to allocate any of the wounds from perils to that unit instead. Also, the squad gets Adamantium Will 6+, which is really interesting. One of the things that's fun about this to me, first of all, is that if you're unfamiliar with the Thousand Suns, every unit can cast a psychic power, and so statistically that means you are going to perils more often. Being able to just dump those wounds onto lower impact or importance models nearby is fantastic. The other thing that's interesting to me about this is that obviously the ability to shunt these wounds off over here, it doesn't matter if that unit is, for example, already pinned because of the inherent weakness of the Legionis Auxilia rules. So really, you can keep them close by. They can be buffers, they can be speed bumps. If they get pinned, so what? And then they can also be slowly taking wounds if, you need a place to dump wounds because you're failing an odd check one way or another. This is a small buff, but it is one really good way to really accentuate one of the things that I guess, or as a Thousand Suns player, you're really going to want to be doing anyway. So it's that sort of focus is really nice. The Sons of Horus, in my opinion, get an absolutely fantastic rule here with the War Master's Spite, and it's I want to talk about another thing about this design in a second. One of the reasons why I like it for the Sons of Horus. There's been a lot of really good, fluffy choices and rules chosen in here. Like, they all seem to, in my opinion, fit. So I'm really happy with that in general, but, cart before the horse. When a friendly unit containing Legionis Astartes Sons of Horus special rule declares a charge against an enemy that has had a model removed from it because of a shooting attack made by their Auxilia counterparts in the same game turn, the charging unit gets a +2 to their charge roll. That's crazy good. So again, similar to one of the things that I liked about the World Eaters special rule is that the Solar Auxilia, which you are taking as an allied detachment, have a rule which complements what you're already trying to do with your Marine force. The Sons of Horus have great close combat rules. They have good close combat units. And a lot of inherent synergy in there. So having something where you're prioritizing shooting, thinking about using that shooting in a way to, thin the ranks a little bit and allow the Sons of Horus to make a devastating charge with much more efficiency, because a +2 to charge is huge as far as your ability to make a 12-inch charge, potentially. But the other thing, too, is this is really, really fluffy. I absolutely love all of the rules that really get the character of the Legion, and I feel like sometimes we forget just how much of a spear tip, full-out assault, sort of thing the Sons of Horus are supposed to be, and this rule definitely makes that happen, so I'm a big fan. Next up is the Word Bearers, and this one is a disappointment to me. Maybe my least favorite. I don't know, we'll have to see when I do the whole thing. The Cult Demagogues, all models in a unit entirely composed of models with Legionis Auxilia, Word Bearers, and Tercio get Fleet 2 and Crusader for the duration of a rule in which at least a single model is within 12 inches of a Word Bearer special rule. Okay, so the first thing, of course, is that this is a rule to note that making sure that the Marines and the Auxilia are next to each other, or close enough to each other. So we are going to be potentially triggering the auto-pinning, all right? Okay. So the benefit that you get from doing so is Crusader and Fleet. So Crusader is a rule that says that a unit with this rule gets to roll an extra dice when making sweeping advances and discard the lowest before you determine the result. Obviously, if you are in a situation where you're doing a sweeping advance, having an extra dice to roll is pretty nice, because a successful sweeping advance can mean that you wipe out your opponent. The other rule is Fleet. And Fleet has a rating associated with it, in this case 2, and what that means is that when you run, you get to run an additional 2 inches, because it's Fleet 2. So again, we're targeting sweeping advances, and we are targeting runs, okay? Now the biggest problem here is that a lot of the Solar Auxilia have special rules or armor which makes running impossible. Solar Auxilia rifle sections, your basic troop that you're going to bring, they have close order as a rule, which we talked about before, which says they can't run. So Fleet 2 actually does nothing for them. Sweeping advance, the Crusader element of it. If the Solar Auxilia, who do not really have much as far as dedicated close combat units, manage to win an assault, then Crusader will come in handy. But it seems unlikely, at least on their own, that is going to be something that really actually happens. It's less likely. Basically, then, these are 2 rules that I guess I don't understand how they're together and why you would do these things, because they seem to be very, very oppositional to the nature of the list that they're trying to augment, which is really sad, because some sort of fervorish, sort of thing would be awesome. Like if Fleet was something that you could actually get and it worked on, for example, Riflemen, then it would be absolutely awesome to see them running extra far, getting the push to get onto objectives early in the game. That would be a really big tactical advantage. But again, it just doesn't work with many of your troops. So ultimately, this one's a bummer for me. Okay, lastly but not least for sure is Diversionary Host from the Alpha Legion. This is a really good rule. When a unit entirely composed of models with this rule, with Legionis Astartes Alpha Legion, is selected as the target of a shooting attack in your opponent's turn, the attacking unit must first take a leadership test, as long as there is a unit entirely composed of models with the Auxilia rule, and with at least one model within 12 inches of the targeted unit, to which the attacking unit can also draw line of sight. If the test is failed, then you have to shoot that close unit. If the leadership test is passed, then you get to go as normal. Okay, so this is really funny, because basically just in the entire shooting phase, if you are aggressive with your Solar Aux deployment, you can make your opponent just be taking all sorts of saves throughout the turn. You likely won't be causing too many screw-ups or goof-ups because of this, maybe 1 or 2. But I mean, if you do, then it's a dramatic change, and it really is going to affect your opponent's plan for their turn. Also, hilariously, if you do, for example, make them shoot at, a tercio of Solar Auxilia, then now you can exploit the tercio rule, and in that reaction fire, you can shoot with, a whole bunch of las guns in response, which las guns aren't strong, but when you put enough of them on any one target, they will definitely feel it. All told, again, I think this is it's another really fluffy rule. It's potentially going to have huge implications, but it's not guaranteed, and having the leadership test associated with it means that your opponent is going to get a chance to get out of the situation, which is probably good, but really powerful and really, really in character. Before we wrap it up, of course, I got to thank everybody. If you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing. We're trying to grow. We're doing a good job of growing the channel. And of course, then, we have to thank our Patreons. So first of all, thanks to Lone Monkey, thanks to the Uptown Garage, thank you Dark Apostle Ben, and of course Hobby Ogre, which, if I haven't said it already, the link below is still there for 10% off. Thank you so much for being a supporter. Really appreciate everything that you guys do to help make this more possible. Okay. Well, if you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comment box, or just email them to me at ineptusastartes30k@gmail.com. And hope to talk to you very soon with the other half of this concept. Take care.